Hi, I'm Loris Alexander. This is Bridge City News, and here are some of the top stories we've been following. The federal government is working with the provinces on allocating our country's eventual COVID-19 vaccine. $542 million are being sent to Indigenous groups across the country to set up child and family welfare services. And we check out shops at our local Christmas market with COVID-19 restrictions in tow.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Thank you for joining us. Health Minister Patty Hajdu says the federal government is talking with provincial health ministers about how to fairly allocate doses of the eventual COVID-19 vaccine. She says this will get easier later next year as more doses arriving will mean the vaccine becomes more widely available.
Especially in the first quarter when we don't have very many doses. I think it'll become less of a pressing issue as we hope to receive more doses as the vaccines arrive and as they are approved. But certainly we are being guided, all of us, by the National Advisory Committee on Immunization, who, as you know, released some very broad general criteria about who likely should receive the vaccine first. Provinces and territories will also then do their own assessments within their own immunization programs about their own prioritization. In terms of the allocation of each province and territory, those conversations are ongoing right now with health ministers, so I can't be conclusive on that, but only to say that I'm listening intently, and obviously Canada will reserve some doses to vaccinate the populations for which we have responsibility.
The federal government is sending $542 million to Indigenous groups to help them set up welfare services for children and families. Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller said the new money is for everything from research and expert advice to consultations on how those Indigenous governments will establish and run their own child and family services, as well as to support their negotiations with provincial and federal authorities.
As we approach the end of the year, we are also approaching the 1 year since the Act respecting First Nations, Inuit, and Métis children, youth, and families came into force. This historic legislation was co-developed with Indigenous partners to reform child and family services with the aim of reducing the number of Indigenous children in care, as well as enable First Nations, Inuit, and Métis to exercise their jurisdiction over child and family services so that they can decide what is best for their children, their families, and their communities. In order to thrive and fully reach their potential, children and youth need to have solid supports and resources, strong ties to immediate and extended families, as well as ties to their home community and cultural connections. Sadly, this is not the reality for far too many Indigenous children. According to the 2016 census data, Indigenous children make up over half of all children in foster care, even though they only account for less than 8% of all children aged 0 to 14. But behind these devastating numbers, there are real children, real and terrible stories, and these stories shouldn't happen to anyone, much less than innocent children. The overrepresentation of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis children in the child and family services system has been described as a humanitarian crisis. It is a crisis.
Bridge City News was at Lethbridge's big Christmas farmers market this afternoon. With COVID-19 restrictions in place, the market was still in the Christmas spirit as shoppers supported local.
We are an Alberta Agriculture and Forestry approved farmers market, which gives us the ability to actually function as a market, which is perfect for us because we are supporting over 180 local vendors, artisans, entrepreneurs here in the Southern Alberta economy. Beyond that, with the increased restrictions, we have to be within 25% of our posted Alberta fire protocol. And so we're well below that. We're capping at 500 guests on site at any given time. So we're maintaining our own capacity controls. Every person coming onto site is being screened in multiple locations, being checked for temperature. Masks and or face shields are mandatory on site at all times.
I think that it's amazing that there's still something open. Everybody was up in the air, they didn't know, so hopeful And the public has come out and they've supported. There's vendors from out of town. Few have canceled, as you'll see by some of the empty spots, but there's still a lot of community support and masks, and the exhibition has been very careful with their checking people when they come in and hand sanitizers and everything. So yeah, it's worked out really well.
Lethbridge Police Service had their first ever charity check stop at the NMAX parking lot this afternoon. Donations of unwrapped toys were accepted on behalf of the Lethbridge Family Services Angel Tree campaign, along with non-perishable items for the Lethbridge Food Bank as part of the Christmas Hope campaign, and monetary donations were divided for both.
We're collecting donations for Lethbridge Family Services and the Lethbridge Food Bank. The Family Services Angel Tree program, they're providing toys to kids who might go without this year. So last year they supplied toys for about 2,600 kids, and this year they expect, considering everything that's going on, that donation request to go up. So they're expecting to supply at least 3,000 kids with toys this year. Right now we're at over 1,000 toys donated, and there's still an hour left to go, and that's not counting the cash donations or food either. We're collecting for the food bank as well, and their van's full. We're trying to figure out what to do with the excess right now. So yeah, it's overwhelming, the success. The number of vehicles coming through is, like I said, it's overwhelming, and then the people who can donate are donating a lot. So we're getting boxes and bags of donations from every vehicle. So the success is resounding. Thank you to everyone who came by. It was a success because of everybody who was coming through. So great thank you to the whole community, everybody who came by and supported.
Santa and his helper, who's not Rudolph the reindeer, but an alpaca named Hope, stopped by Lethbridge today. Santa, of course, followed COVID-19 guidelines and was socially distanced as he made his way to visit.
Okay, so we came to town today to spread a little bit of Christmas cheer to people in the Lethbridge area, and we brought along one of our alpacas, Hope, with us, and we stopped off at about 9 different homes today. Kids like it, you know, and they really like Hope. Everybody likes Hope's little noises and petting her and stuff. Not many kids have seen an alpaca, so it's something different for them. And I will be stopping in Lethbridge here on December 6th. And anybody who would like to have Santa and Hope come to their door, they can get a hold of us on Facebook at White Barn Fun Farm, or you can go to our website at whitebarnfunfarm.ca and book a appointment there as well, and we'll come to your house and stop by and see you.
As we enter a season usually filled with in-person Christmas parties, COVID-19 has changed the way companies give back this year in a time when the need is great. There is one Lethbridge company that is offering a unique way of giving back. Cornerstone Funeral Home is launching 25 Days of Giving.
25 Days of Giving is really special to us because it celebrates our 25th year in service. And so 25 years that we've been able to serve the community of Selden, Alberta, where we live, 25 years where we've been honored to be able to help the families where we live, help them going through a loss of a loved one, help them be able to give back to the community that we live and love.
And on their 22nd day of giving, Cornerstone Funeral Home picked Lethbridge Family Services to help with their Angel Tree program.
LFS, or Lethbridge Family Services, has been a staple in our community for a number of years, and they constantly give back. They're very community-minded, very community-orientated, and we find a lot of the same in ourselves as we find with them. And so it's really nice to be able to partner up with them and be able to give back, and especially during their Angel Tree campaign.
We're so thankful. One of the hardest packages to put together are teens, because every teen requires the certain generic things that we put in worth $50, and then we have extra stuff to put in. So when you have a bundle like what we're doing today, 36 teens, they're due tomorrow. We need to get the teen packages done for the schools because they're closing early, everyone knows. We have this help of Cornerstone volunteers.
Gallucci says numbers have risen this year by 20%, and with new restrictions, delivery of presents comes with new challenges.
We need more gifts. We need more donations. And for the first time ever, we're delivering gift bundles to each family member. That takes a lot of effort. Only 6 gift bundles can be delivered per hour because we take our time with them. We place them lovingly on the doorstep. We make sure they're taken into their homes. Each family is called.
Recapping one of our top news stories, Health Minister Patty Hajdu says the federal government is holding discussions with provincial health ministers about a fair way of allocating doses of the COVID-19 vaccine when it arrives. And taking a look at weekend weather, we had a few flurries this afternoon along with some chillier weather. Skies will be clear overnight with a low of -6 degrees. For tomorrow, a bit warmer with sunshine and a high of 7 degrees. After the break, we check in with contributor Brian Lilly on the state of vaccines for COVID-19 in Canada.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Christmas at Casa Holiday Market is going online this year from now until December 1st at christmasatcasa.ca. Avoid the crowds and find one-of-a-kind art pieces and fine crafts, handmade by over 40 vendors. Depending on the vendor, there are various options for local drop-off, shipping, and safe curbside pickup. Visit christmasatcasa.ca today. Shop of Wonders is looking for volunteers beginning in December to help bring some Christmas cheer to families who need a special something this year. This is a My City Care initiative through My Victory Church in Lethbridge, which helps to give people hope and a hand up. Volunteers will wrap gifts, entertain kids, and assist with other tasks. To learn more about this opportunity, call Carol at 403-942-1378 or email carol@myvictory.ca. Get to know your city and take part in the Lethbridge Scavenger Hunt. Download the Let's Roam Scavenger Hunt app, lace up your walking shoes, and head out with family to discover the best landmarks in Lethbridge. Put your navigation skills to the test while enjoying the journey at your own pace. No reservations, no tour guides, and fun for all ages. Visit letsroam.com/scavenger hunt. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
The Trudeau government came under fire recently for admitting that Canada will get COVID vaccines later than other countries. To discuss this in more detail is Toronto Sun journalist Brian Lilly. Brian, while the United States could start receiving their vaccines next month, it'll be what, late January at the earliest for Canadians?
Yeah, the United States, according to some reports, could be as early as December 11th, depending on what the Food and Drug Administration does. Here in Canada, even if we have quicker approval, which I'm not convinced we will with Health Canada. Even, look, all of these major organizations work together, the FDA, Public Health Canada, they all share information and they're all supposed to have, where one approves, the other can give quick approval. And at a time like this, we need that. And yet on things like rapid testing, Canada's been slow. So we could be delayed by a couple of things. One, the approval process that the government decides to follow within Canada. And two, the fact that, according to the Prime Minister, he says we just don't have massive vaccine production capabilities anymore. Well, we used to. And I remember the Harper government giving a contract to a Quebec vaccine manufacturer to say, look, if we need the H1N1 vaccine, when we get it, you will be making it. And they gave them a bunch of money to make sure that Canada had it. I'll give the Trudeau government credit on some things. They've gone around and they've come to agreements with Pfizer in the US, with AstraZeneca in the UK, with Moderna. All these different companies around the world, they're signing, I think it's up to 7 different agreements to get whatever vaccines they can. But we are nowhere near the front of the line, and that is a major problem.
Now, a big question is how will the vaccines get from the federal government to the local communities? There's even talk of using the Army, Brian. Now, you spoke with General Rick Hillier, who's heading up the distribution task force. He's probably telling you it's a pretty big job.
Well, he's heading up the distribution task force for Ontario alone. And what's surprising here is that we're starting to get more information from provincial governments than federal governments. And the federal government has been under pressure to say, tell us what your plan is. We know you don't have a vaccine yet. We know that none have been fully approved. We're hopeful that they will come soon, but they could show up sooner than expected. We weren't expecting that Pfizer could be ready as early as December 11th or Moderna could be ready before the end of the year. Now we're looking at that. Okay, what if Canada miraculously gets vaccine before the end of the year or in early January? Are we ready? The feds keep delaying and saying nothing. The Ford government here in Ontario decided we need help. And it was Premier Doug Ford who said, you know what? I want a general in charge. I want an expert in logistics. And he called up General Rick Hillier, who was Chief of Defense Staff from 2005 to 2008, led Canada's forces through some of the toughest days in Afghanistan and knows about logistics. I talked to him and he says he's up for the job, but it's going to be difficult. I also did ask him, for all those who are saying, oh, no, I don't like the Army being involved. It means it's going to be a mandatory vaccine and troops will come by and shove it in my arm. And he said, get real. That's not going to happen. We don't have mandatory vaccines in Canada, and the Army's not going to be doing that. But they are ready to stand by and help with distribution, which is going to be a massive undertaking, especially for Pfizer. Remember, this is the vaccine that needs to be kept at minus 70 Celsius in order to stay stable.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has allegedly been taking some shots at premiers of late, claiming that they're behind on rapid testing, that he's given them millions of rapid tests which are not being used. Is this really true?
No, unfortunately not at all. And it's a bit of a break in what we've seen as, a wall of solidarity between the premiers and the federal government. And it's not coming from premiers taking shots at the Prime Minister. Occasionally they will say, look, Prime Minister, we need the rapid test approved. We heard that a lot from Premier Jason Kenney in Alberta, Premier Doug Ford in Ontario, but it was never partisan. And it wasn't, hey, you're sitting on it. It was, this is our priority. We need it done. Well, finally, the rapid tests are approved. And yes, the feds have said that they will fund millions of tests to go to the province, but they haven't sent them. And so last week, the Prime Minister said this in the House of Commons, and I called the Ford government and said, what's going on? They said, you've got to talk to the bureaucrats about this. This is not a political question. I talked to the bureaucrats from the Ministry of Health in Ontario and from Public Health Ontario, which is an arm's length organization they actually run the testing. They both told me the same thing. So the Prime Minister says millions of tests across the country. The biggest province, 40% of the population, at that point had received 89,000 ID Now tests. These are the ones from Abbott Laboratories. 70,000 PanBio tests, which are still kind of being, sussed out. They spent the last few weeks, they would run a rapid test alongside a standard PCR test, just to make sure that they are calibrated properly and that they're doing them accurately. They have been deployed by the provinces. Alberta's been running the program out at Calgary Airport, but the Prime Minister, for whatever reason, is trying to make it sound like he's doing his job. It's those premiers that aren't. That's playing politics with the pandemic. It's not what we need.
While we're all in this pandemic together, Brian, you obtained federal data showing that while many private sector workers lost their jobs, close to 60,000 federal workers were apparently sent home and told to collect pay while not working.
Yeah, this is remarkable. And that phrase, we're all in this together. How many times have we heard politicians say this? I haven't been able to obtain provincial numbers from any province, but the federal government, I'm sorry, this is frustrating. 58,000, more than 58,000 workers were sent home with pay on what's called 699. That's leave other. So that's not maternity leave, it's not sick leave, it's not bereavement leave, it's not long-term disability. And on the government's website, they say this is specifically about COVID-19, and many people didn't have childcare or they couldn't connect through their IT networks. Well, there were a lot of people in the private sector who had trouble with childcare, who had trouble with their IT networks and had to figure it out. At the same time, there were 2.7 million Canadians in this time frame between mid-March and early April who lost their jobs. 2.7 million Canadians lost their jobs. Another 2.8 million saw reduced hours, significantly reduced hours, according to StatsCan. And 58,000 federal workers were told, go home and collect pay. It's more than 18 million hours were paid out between mid-March and the beginning of September. The last date we have is September 6th. At that point, there were about 8,400 workers still on this leave. Since I published this piece in the Toronto Sun, Hal, federal workers have contacted me and said, you don't know the half of it. Some departments didn't even use this code, which tells us how many were on that. So they were just told, go home, don't worry about working. Others have told me the incidents of departments using 699, this code, have gone up again. One worker saying after being off for 6 months, they got back to regular work. Now they're down to 2 days a week and 3 days at home with pay. They said they don't like it. They said, I don't feel right about being paid to sit at home, collect full pay while watching TV because I'm told not to go anywhere.
Brian, there's a new report outlining some problems with the new federal loan program. It's for businesses in trouble that have hired more consultants than the number of companies it gave out loans to.
Yeah, this is remarkable. A multi-billion-dollar program that has given out very little money just to two companies, a casino company and a coal mining company. This is supposed to be for large employers. It's supposed to be the lender of last resort if a company gets into trouble. And they've given out loans to two companies, but they've given out consulting contracts to many more. This is bizarre. Conservative MP Michael Cooper digging up this info, putting it out in the public and saying, this is yet another example of how the federal government just hasn't been able to get programs for businesses right. I'll give the Trudeau government credit where it's due. They, despite some problems, they got CERB out the door. When people needed money just to be able to put food on the table, the money was there. But when it came to this, this giant program to help large companies stay afloat, so that we didn't have companies that employed thousands of people going out of business and laying off workers, they got it wrong. When it came to the rent relief program, they got it wrong. And even with the updated rent relief program, they got it wrong. When it came to the wage subsidy program, they've messed that up more than once. And it's as if, one bankruptcy consultant who talked to me, represents small and medium-sized businesses, said, when I look at how the federal government designs these programs, it's clear to me that there's nobody on the inside designing them that has any idea how businesses work.
With the feds doling out hundreds of millions of dollars, our debt just keeps on rising, Brian. We've not seen a federal budget in almost 2 years now. Are we getting any closer to getting a handle on our finances? Our debt is over $1 trillion.
Well, we think it's over $1 trillion. When asked, they'll never actually answer. I mean, these are estimates from private sector economists, from the parliamentary budget officer. Pierre Poilievre, the conservative finance critic, has asked multiple times, is this accurate? And he gets nowhere. We're hoping in about a week we'll get some sense, but it won't even be a full budget. The last budget we had, I believe it was the end of February. I know it was in Ottawa for it. It was around the same time as Jody Wilson-Raybould hearings. Late February, early March of 2019. And now it's almost 2 years later, and what we're going to get is a fiscal update. It's not unusual to get a fiscal update in October or November, but normally there's been a budget, say, in March sometime. This is going to be the closest we get to a snapshot. And given how reluctant newly minted Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland has been to divulge any information, I'm not sure how clear a picture we will get. If it's like past ones, it will be an eye-opener. If it's the way the government has been behaving lately, it will be a lot of smoke and mirrors. So we'll have to wait and see a week from Wednesday.
Foreign Affairs Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne is warning that tough talk on China could hurt the release of the two Michaels, Kovrig and Spavor. Meanwhile, there are other MPs who are part of a group demanding that Ottawa release Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou.
And Nikki Ashton from the NDP and newly minted Green leader Annamie Paul, who was hoping for a seat. She lost in the Toronto Centre by-election, so she is not my MP, thank goodness. She's out there campaigning with the Communist Party of China to release Miss Meng. That's confusing to me. It's also confusing to me why Minister Champagne is now saying this tough talk is going to hurt things. The Trudeau government, after not having tough talk for a long time, started having tough talk. The Prime Minister, the Foreign Affairs Minister, the Defense Minister called it hostage negotiations, or hostage diplomacy, sorry. Now suddenly they're backing away from their own tough talk. It does leave you scratching your head. it is more than 700 days that these two men have been held hostage by China in response to Meng Wanzhou being detained on an extradition treaty. China wants an extradition treaty with us, by the way, but they don't want us to honor the ones that we have. So a little bit confusing there. But I'm not sure why they've decided to go from not saying anything negative about China to getting tough on them to now saying we can't have tough talk. It leaves you scratching your head, Hal.
Brian, when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced his gun ban on May 1st, he cited the Nova Scotia massacre that occurred days earlier as part of his reasoning. But even though Trudeau's solution focuses on legal gun owners, you obtained a briefing that shows he knew before the announcement that the Nova Scotia shooter only had illegal guns.
Yeah, and within days, myself and others in the media had either been contacted or contacted people who knew Gabriel Wortman and said that they had reported him to the RCMP. His own father told my colleague Joe Warmington that he had reported his son to the RCMP for threats of violence. And people had reported that he had illegal weapon stashes, and they never went to see them. So I'm not shocked that this briefing note presented to Trudeau days after the shooting on April 24th showed that he knew 3 of the firearms that he used were smuggled in from the United States. A law enforcement carbine, that's the rifles that police now carry. It was traced to a California gun shop, never legally imported into Canada. 2 pistols purchased at a gun shop in Maine, illegally smuggled into Canada. And then a Ruger Mini 14, which is a fairly common rifle in Canada, but was purchased in Canada. No idea how Wortman got his hands on it because he never was authorized to own guns in this country. So there's a lot of questions about that. Despite that, Trudeau went out and said he was bringing in the gun ban. Now, for people that don't understand why this matters, the Prime Minister's solution to a massacre that happened is not to deal with crime, not to deal with gun smuggling, but to say to legal gun owners who are already following the law, you have to hand over your rifles. We've known for a long time the major problem with gun crime in this country is the border. Doesn't matter what area of the country we're talking about, it's the border. They're going to spend close to $1 billion on this so-called gun buyback. Meanwhile, $86 million over 5 years for the RCMP and the Canada Border Service Agency to deal with smuggling issues.
One of our regular contributors, Toronto Sun columnist and political reporter Brian Lilly, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Hal.
Life is often filled with challenges, unexpected events, sickness, job loss, death, broken families, and the list goes on. Responses to these difficulties vary widely, from the extreme of suicide to recovery and building a successful life. Today's guests are no stranger to this. Chad and Kathy Robichaud. Chad is a former Force Recon Marine who served 8 tours of duty in Afghanistan, a former police officer and champion mixed martial arts fighter. He's also the author of An Unfair Advantage: Victory in the Midst of Battle. Chad and Kathy, thank you so much for joining us via Skype from the Woodlands, Texas, right?
Yes, thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. So first of all, can you give us a brief snapshot of what your book is about and who it's for?
Yeah, well, my book is about a lot of my experiences through life as a Marine, my time in Afghanistan, my time as a professional fighter, and a lot of challenges I faced in life, which are no different than many people challenges people face in their everyday life. But more importantly, how do we move forward? I found myself suffering with some of the same things that many military warriors suffer with today. In the United States, we have over 20 suicides per day. The divorce rates are over 80% in combat veterans. Those being diagnosed with PTSD is 30 to 40%. So a lot of people are struggling with a lot of things. And I found a way forward through the restoration of my faith, through a relationship with Christ, and applying biblical principles in my life that helped me to move forward. So I share all that in the book, and just really laying a pathway forward for those who struggle with all of life's issues.
Wow. So tell us a bit about the Mighty Oaks Foundation, which you and your wife decided to start.
Yes, after my time coming home from Afghanistan, like I said, we faced many things as a family. with my diagnosis of PTSD, a near divorce in our family, my personal battle with suicide, and then on the other side of that, finding hope and restoration in our family and the ability to move forward. We want to share that what we discovered with others. And so we founded Mighty Oaks Foundation. It was almost 10 years ago now. We've run both resiliency and recovery programs. In our resiliency programs, I speak on active duty military bases around the world. I've spoken about 150,000 active duty troops, given away about 100,000 copies of my books in these events. We get lots of requests from units all over the world and to do those programs. And then we have recovery programs where we run 30 camps per year. Our camps are 6 days long. They're non-clinical, faith-based peer-to-peer mentoring programs. And we've had over 4,000 people come through those programs between active duty, military veterans, and spouses. And Kathy's, and her team's able to talk to a lot of the spouses about where they struggle with on the spouse side of things.
Chad, what kinds of things did you experience in Afghanistan that ended up causing the post-traumatic stress disorder?
Well, I think for me, it was going to Afghanistan and not being completely prepared. The military talks about the pillars of resiliency: mind, body, spirit, social, being mentally tough, physically tough, having a strong spiritual foundation, and being surrounded with the right people in a social network. I think I would have believed I was prepared in all those areas, but for me, my spiritual foundation was broken. I didn't really have a relationship with God as I should have gone into that environment and been exposed to such evil atrocities that you see in a place like Afghanistan. And over time, those things made me angry. They made me frustrated. I became very intense and person, and those things being not rectified or unchecked in my life began to manifest in physiological symptoms, which later began as panic attacks and eventually being diagnosed with PTSD. I lost some team members there. A lot of Afghans that worked for me were killed there, and just the loss of friends, seeing things, the oppression of the Afghan people, the just hardships on the Afghan people that the Taliban imposed on them, particularly the sexual molestation of children and the way the Taliban, treat the Afghan people, really made me have a hatred inside of me that just surfaced and manifested in all these symptoms that I dealt with PTSD.
Right. Now, did you know that you had PTSD?
I knew something was wrong. I mean, I didn't diagnose myself with PTSD. In 2007, PTSD wasn't a very common term. I knew people lost their minds, went crazy, went over the edge, and I felt myself slipping in that way, and I felt it getting worse and worse over time. The physiological effects were, numbness in my arms and face, feel like my throat was swelling shut, and the inability to breathe, feel like you're gonna have a heart attack. And as there's progressed, it got to where I'd almost wake up out of a fog during intense times of operations, and it's something known as disassociation, to where you almost things aren't present time. You feel like they're a little delayed, and you're seeing yourself in third person. Those are all signs that I experienced early on and knew there was a problem, but I didn't want to ask for help because I didn't want to be viewed to my peers as weak and even pulled from doing my job. So I tried to push it down and continue operating. Only things got worse, and eventually the wheels flew off for me, and I had to come home and face that diagnosis.
Yeah. Now, you served 8 tours in Afghanistan. So, Kathy, what did you observe in Chad when he returned from these overseas deployments?
At first, it was different than what you would think it was. He came home, he was very quiet, kind of not his normal self, very quiet, just needed an atmosphere that was a little more peaceful, which was really hard with 3 young kids. He was actually seeking comfort for the first 3 months. So I knew something was wrong with him. And he'll probably share a little bit more. It wasn't until after, a year into this, maybe a little less than that I thought what this post-traumatic thing that he had was over and done with, because that quiet time, the peaceful time that we needed to provide kind of ended. And we had started our own mixed martial arts gym that he got really involved in. So I thought that whatever he was dealing with was over and done with. But what had happened was it all turned into raging anger. And in our home, it was a scary place to be. There was a fake facade he was putting on the outside. And what hurt most is I knew the truth. I knew what was happening on the inside. I knew what was happening to our marriage. For the next 3 years, it was crumbling. But I have to say, though, we didn't have a solid foundation to begin with. We got married young. I was 18, he was 19. I had 3 kids by the time I was 22. I knew how to be a mom, and I knew how to somewhat be a wife and run my home. But when it came to handling this post-traumatic stress thing in the anger realm and what he was going through and have grace for him, I was not successful at.
Right. Now, how did this affect your marriage?
Yeah, so about 3 years into it, unfortunately, he stepped outside of our marriage and into relationships with other women. And for me, I was done with that. So you put the anger on, anger, the atmosphere of what was going on in our home, the destruction of the family, the kids being emotionally hurt every day, and then the lies and betrayal. I finally said enough was enough, and that's when our marriage finally came to a point that we put our house up for sale, and I moved into my own place, and he moved into his place, and I went ahead and filed divorce papers a little while later.
Chad, tell us about the turning point in your life when you were separated from your wife, living in an apartment, and you were considering suicide. Your wife actually visited your apartment. What did she say to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, that time apart, living in separate places, really gave me a time to reflect on the damage I had done to my wife, my children, and really coming to the conclusion that, I was the common denominator. The problem was me. And that led me to make this thought to come over me that maybe my family would be sad without me, but they would be better off. And I made a decision I was going to take my life. That same, hopeless thought finds a home in the hearts of over 20 veterans every single day. That somehow our family, somehow our loved ones would think they'd be sad without us, but they would be better off. And again, I decided I was going to take my life. And I would sit in my closet. I had my family pictures I'd put on my floor around me. And I had a Glock 22, which is a 40 caliber pistol. And I tried to build up the courage to pull the trigger. And the one thing that kept me from doing it was the knowledge that someone would actually find me. I mean, you're going to go missing, or someone's going to hear the gunshot. And the only person that had a key to my apartment at the time was my son, Hunter. So I couldn't imagine my kid finding me that way. And that would be enough to pump the brakes. But the next day I was back at that thought again and that desire to end my life. And it was during one of those moments that my wife knocked at my door and interrupted me being in that moment. And I answered the door, and we got into an argument because we were arguing about everything at the time. And in the middle of that argument, she asked me a question that, challenged me and probably saved my life. She asked me how I could do everything I did in the Marine Corps. She saw me go into special operations and the amount of discipline and work it took to do that, training for MMA fights and being successful, winning a world title and all these things that she saw me do in my life that took so much discipline and hard work. She's like, how could you do all of that? And when it comes to your family, you'll quit. And that question really challenged me. I'd been successful in professional things. When it came to the most important things, being a husband, being a father, being, for me, that young 17-year-old kid that went to Marine Corps boot camp and made oath to the Marine Corps, my country, myself, to do something important in my life. I quit on all those things, including my own will to live. And I made a radical decision in that moment that I was going to work hard, use that same discipline and work ethic to put my life back together. It had nothing to do with my faith at the time. I just knew that I couldn't do it alone, and I couldn't do it with the people I was surrounded by. I needed accountability in my life, and Kathy introduced me to a man named Steve from her church she was going to, that stepped into my life and began to mentor me and really challenge me and help me to move forward. And that ultimately led to the restoration of my faith and me making a decision to really calibrate my life to the life I believe I was created to live. And that decision resulted in restoration in our marriage and in my own brokenness, having hope again to live, and ultimately what I think I've sought my whole life, and that's purpose. And we were created that purpose. We're meant to have purpose. People leave the military with a lot of purpose and mission, and when they wake up one day and they don't have it, I think that's the major result of suicide. For me, having a purpose again was instrumental in me having a desire to share with others what I had discovered. I realized so many other veterans were struggling with the same thing, and I felt a burden on my heart to pay it forward, and that manifested in the founding of Mighty Oaks Foundation.
That's amazing. So, Chad, what advice do you have for anyone watching right now who may be considering suicide?
Well, a simple message that there is hope. I mean, when you're in those darkest moments, you believe that no one can feel like you, no one's life can be as bad as yours. You feel like you're going to be there forever and it'll never end, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel, and that's just not true. There is a better day around the corner. It may not feel like it right now. It may feel like this is forever, but that's just not the case. And you can't make a permanent decision, which suicide is a very permanent decision, to temporary problems. Get help, reach out, share the things you're struggling with. I'll say from a faith-based perspective, my relationship with Christ radically saved my life. If you haven't given God a chance in your life, then, what do you have to lose? I came to this moment for me to realize I had tried everything. Nothing worked. We have a saying at Mighty Oaks Foundation, if what you're trying isn't working, why not try something different? Try something different. And for me, I would even say, give God a chance in your life.
Right. So what other preventative steps can people take to ensure consistent spiritual growth?
Accountability, fellowship. For me, I had spent a lot of time going to church, but was never in any kind of relationship or fellowship with people, and I had no accountability in my life. So I went to church to check the box, but there was no one to ensure that I was living the principles that I was learning and preaching or saying I subscribe to. And so having accountability in your life is very important. Having someone in your life that you can be vulnerable and transparent to completely. I mean, maybe that's not your spouse. You can't always, a woman can't talk to her husband about all the things that women struggle with at times, and men can't speak to their wives about maybe some of the temptations they're having or struggles they're having. So it's important to have same-sex accountability and partnerships at a very transparent, deep level in your life to be able to walk through life together with.
Chad, where can people get a hold of your book?
Yeah, so An Unfair Advantage is available on Amazon and any of your major retail outlets, Barnes & Noble. The easiest way to get it is right there on Amazon. And get a copy, if not for yourself, for anyone that might be struggling. And part of the proceeds of getting a copy of An Unfair Advantage helps me to give books away to our troops. I've given away over 100,000 copies now, and it's awesome to see a grateful nation of Americans get behind an effort like that. If any veterans are struggling, or anybody, first responders, spouses are struggling, know that there's help. Our program, MightyOaksPrograms.org, all the programs are covered. We cover all the costs, including travel, and so yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Chad and Kathy Robichaux. Chad is the author of An Unfair Advantage, Victory in the Midst of Battle. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us on.
Abortion is legal in Canada, but it's not a settled issue, as some claim. A sizable number of Canadians still oppose the termination of the unborn, but now the question is, do these people have the right to freely express their opinions? A recent court decision in Lethbridge ruled in favor of free speech. Our guest today is Carol Crossan, a Calgary constitutional lawyer who's been representing Lethbridge and District Pro-Life in their court case with the city of Lethbridge. She joins me now via Skype from Airdrie. Carol, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Hi, nice to be with you.
Carol, can you maybe share some of the backstory with our viewers about this case?
Certainly, Jeanette. Well, this started a few years ago when my client, Lethbridge Pro-Life, approached the city inquiring as to posting an ad called Preborn Babies Feel Pain on bus benches and on the exterior of buses. And the city initially agreed after some time. It took about 14 months for the city to agree. But the city eventually posted that ad, and shortly thereafter the city pulled the ad, and the city said its reasons for pulling the ad was on the basis of adverse community reaction. And so Lethbridge Pro-Life attempted to work back and forth with the city to find out how it could adjust the ad and to negotiate with the city on reposting the ad. Eventually, when that proved fruitless, Lethbridge Pro-Life approached the city with 5 new ads. And those ads ranged anything from captions saying, human rights should not depend upon where you are, with a picture of a pregnant woman on one side of the ad and a woman the same woman holding a baby on the other side of the ad, an ad with me, again, still me, 3 pictures of unborn children, and then finally a healthy newborn child on the other side of the ad. Equality should begin in the womb, with a picture of a pregnant woman. Birth did not transform me into a child, with a picture of a healthy little baby. And life should be the most fundamental human right. So those were the 5 ads at issue, and the city rejected those ads for a variety of reasons. And because of that rejection, Lethbridge Pro-Life went to court, filed a notice of application for a judicial review of that decision. That came before the court in October of last year. And we just received the decision from the court, a 48-page decision with some wonderful gems, I must say, Jeanette, on the right to freedom of expression.
So the court ruled in your favor then, right, declaring that the city of Lethbridge acted unreasonably when it banned the ads.
Yes, that's true. And the court did for a variety of reasons, and the reasons give us some wonderful content for the right to free speech, not only in regard to those who are sharing a message about abortion, but those who are sharing really any kind of message across Canada. So coming out and saying that every individual has the right to freedom of expression, even if people complain about the message, that every individual in Canada has a right to free speech, even if people are upset with what they say, that the right to free speech exists even if some believe that the message is inaccurate. The court said that government can't rely solely on a private regulator or private opinion in order to reject free speech, and that government must act in an unbiased fashion, not take the side of one side of a message to the exclusion of another. It's a wonderful ruling for individuals all across the country.
But wasn't there a complaint that the ads were misleading and contained inaccurate information? What was the ruling on that?
Well, the court really gave us some strong content on that. The court said that inaccuracy is not a basis to prohibit free speech. In fact, the court said that there is no support for the idea that expression must be widely accepted, accurate, or scientifically verifiable in order to be protected. And that's an important issue right now, Jeanette, where our society really has a big focus on false news or inaccuracy. And so if an individual has to prove that their opinion, and this is just opinion, is accurate in order for that opinion to be protected, that's a bar that few individuals could ever meet.
And it seems that there's many in our society that feel that if unpopular and offensive viewpoints are expressed, and if there's a public outcry, then shutting down those opinions is justified. So did the judge have anything to say about that?
Well, the judge agreed that the right to free speech is for the majority opinion. He said that freedom of expression is meant to protect minority opinions from being drowned out by the majority. And he also spoke to the issue of upset, because there's the idea often that you have the right to free speech unless you offend someone or upset someone. Well, he said the opposite. He said that a strong and healthy democracy requires a willingness on the part of the public to accept that the expression of opinion and ideas may at times shock, offend, and even disturb people.
Oh, interesting.
He came out very strong, but you know, his opinion does not vary from the jurisprudence in Canada on free speech. It in fact strongly accords with that jurisprudence. That's what the court has said for years.
Okay, now the court also found that the city was biased because in part the city only looked at the negative responses to the ads and didn't take into consideration positive responses as well. So any idea why government bodies seem to do this so often?
I think sometimes the state loses sight of the fact that they're to be neutral on issues, and sometimes perhaps their personal opinions play into their decision making. And so this is a return, this decision is a return to the idea that the state has a duty to remain neutral on these issues and to treat both parties fairly.
What are the options now for Lethbridge Pro-Life? Can they now freely run the ads again, or could the city once again refuse to allow them?
Well, Lethbridge Pro-Life now will go back to the city and apply to run those ads. And that's usually the result of a judicial review application that's successful.
Okay, interesting. So how do you respond to the argument that free speech has limits? The issue of free speech isn't limited to just this topic, of course. There are so many other controversial issues, right?
Right. Well, you know, free speech does have its limits. And in the court judgment, Justice Gates referred to those limits in referencing another case at the Alberta Court of Appeal. And in that case, the justice said that speech that breaks the law, illegal speech, is not permitted under our Constitution. And this in no way was illegal, hateful speech. It didn't breach the criminal code. It didn't breach human rights legislation. And so those are the appropriate limits that apply to freedom of expression.
And then talking about like how there's so many other controversial issues out there. So there's been issues where university professors, for example, are being suspended or fired for simply inviting civil debate and discussion. So why does this kind of thing seem to scare academic leaders? This used to be what universities were all about, right?
Yes, it's very unfortunate, Jeanette, and a lot of what I do is litigation in the area of free speech. And it's unfortunate when society starts to move in the direction of muzzling viewpoints that personal individuals, you know, they feel are upsetting or offensive, or they don't accord with their message, because the very lifeblood of a democracy is the exchange of ideas. Justice Gates cited an old case in the judgment where he says, history has repeatedly demonstrated that the first step taken by totalitarian regimes is to muzzle the media and then the individual in order to prevent the dissemination of views and opinions that may be contrary to those of the government. We don't want to see that happen, because that same judgment said if these exchanges are stifled, democratic government is threatened. The only way we move ahead in society is if people feel free to have civil debate on issues. And in the past, that's how we've progressed. At the time certain messages come out, they're often not appreciated, and there is some pushback, but our society progresses when we move ahead. We think of many of the movements in the past that at their time there was a lot of upset created. I think of the civil rights movement, I think of the suffragette movement. A lot of the issues that now we accept, issues to do with racism and equal treatment, that we accept there should be equality and fairness, because individuals years ago spoke out when there was some pushback and some change was made because of it. We can't afford not to let voices today speak out in like manner.
I think you just answered my next question. So if the movement towards stifling debate and free speech should actually prevail in Canada, what would the consequences be for our society?
Well, I think the consequences, Jeanette, would be that we as guardians of the gate, those who are trying to protect these long-held fundamental freedoms, would see the erosion of those freedoms. There's a wonderful quote from an old case, and I love to quote it, and Justice Gates quoted it as well, where in an old case, justice from the Supreme Court of Canada said that freedom of expression is a little less vital to man's mind and spirit as breathing is to his physical existence. These long-held freedoms are in the heart, I believe, of every individual. And if we don't watch carefully, the right to express ourselves, that age-old principle, will be eroded. And it's so crucial to our soul, just like breathing is to our physical existence, that we need to guard that right for expression on either side of every issue so that we can continue to flourish as a democracy.
And looking ahead, Carol, where do you see the free speech issue and also the abortion issue headed over the next decade or so?
Well, I can't really speak to the abortion issue myself because I'm a free speech lawyer, and that's really the legal basis on which I stand to support these clients. But I can speak to free speech, and I hope that all of us are vigilant in guarding that right so that 10 years from now, Jeanette, as we project, there will be still the free expression, the free exchange of ideas so that we can move forward to see further progress in our society.
And with that, Carol, it looks like we are about out of time. Carol Croston is a Calgary constitutional lawyer out of Airdrie, Alberta. Carol, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Jeanette. Happy to be with you.
I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.